Welcome to Broadview United at the Barbuda site. We're glad that you've joined us. For those at both sites, we are worshiping together. And as we begin to learn more about each other, we do so in a way filled with grace and gratitude for the ways in which this new community is unfolding. We begin our service by acknowledging we're on the lands of the Coast Salish, particularly the Lekwungen, and we give thanks for their stewardship of this land as we seek to work, worship, and pray with thanksgiving and move into a place of right relationship. And so as we prepare ourselves to make this journey through this final iteration of this story in the book of Acts about Paul and Silas, may we open our hearts and prepare ourselves for new insights. Margaret?
We light this candle remembering the person of Jesus, remembering how he walked with all people, calling them to fullness of life, saying that each person is precious in the sight of God. And so as we gather for worship this day, may you light your candle as a symbol of our unity and our diversity, and we continue with our worship. So as Mark was saying, we're going to continue with the story from Acts. And for some of you at the Cedar Hill Cross site, we've heard a little bit of feedback of, oh gosh, they're doing that story again. And it's one of our differences. But what we've had a practice of doing here at the Arbutus site for many years now is taking a piece of scripture for about a month's time and looking at it from several different slants over that month. So we'll take this track 1 week, and then we'll dig a little deeper and do this track. And so as we continue our story, we hope that we'll all find meaning in this passage for this time. And so a recap of where we've been. Paul and Silas are traveling in Philippi, and they come across a slave girl who has basically been making some money for her owners by virtue of fortune telling. Paul and Silas have an encounter with her, and she's freed from that divination. And then, because the people who owned her had to crack down on somebody, Paul and Silas are thrown in jail. And it's there that they have an encounter with the jailer. But before they're freed, there's an earthquake, which is metaphorical, of course. All the prisoners are freed. The jailer is distraught, knowing that he'll be the one called to account for that. And so he's about to take his own life when Paul says, we're here with you, we're not going anywhere. And so then they proceed to have a time where they go back to the jailer's house and they are baptized. The jailer washes their wounds and they have a meal together and they are baptized. We're picking up from that point at verse 17. Verse 35. When morning came, the magistrates sent the police saying, let those men go. And the jailer reported the message to Paul saying, the magistrates sent word to let you go. Therefore, come out now and go in peace. But Paul replied, they have beaten us in public, uncondemned, men who are Roman citizens, and have thrown us into prison. And now they are going to discharge us in secret? Certainly not. Let them come and take us out themselves. The police reported these words to the magistrates, and they were afraid when they heard that they were Roman citizens. So they came and apologized to them, and they took them out and asked them to leave the city. After leaving the prison, they went to Lydia's home. And when they had seen and encouraged the brothers and sisters there, they departed. May we find hope and inspiration in these words. Thanks be to God.
So we're at an interesting crossroads. As we come to the end of this story, there's still much to be mined and said about it. As I've been reflecting with colleagues, as we come to the end of June, which often is naturally a time of ending of school, ending of work, people moving into holidays. COVID, of course, has changed all of that. And so as we are invited to move into this phase 3, we're still really not sure what that is. And it's been heavy. It's been heavy as individuals, in the isolation, in the changes of patterns, in what we do and how we do it, in our work, in our school, in our play. And while there is a sense of some anticipation of the summer coming and some shifts in what that is, there is also still lots of uncertainty about whether those carefree days of summer really will be those things. And so, in this midst of the movements of Black Lives Matters and paying attention to privilege and systemic racism, we find ourselves feeling a little bit heavy. This passage has so much to say about all of that. Paul and Silas come into a situation in where they see an injustice. The slave girl, who a system is taking advantage of, and they seek to right that wrong. They seek to use their power, their authority, their privilege to shift it in some way, shape, or form. But because they're foreigners in that city, the amount of privilege or authority that they have is different from those who are there all the time. And so they are beaten and jailed. And in that process, have a lot of options before themselves. The story says that at the time of the earthquake, where typically people would have fled, and the jailer, the one who was at the bottom of that hierarchy, would be the one to bear the cost. Instead, Paul and Silas are mindful of that. And I talked last week about the way in which each person's humanity was recognized in the midst of this story. The story, where it ended last week, said that the jailer took them back to his own home, and he bandaged up their wounds and took care of them. Where they had been before simply thrown in and left to their own accord with their blood and their wounds and their bruises, now someone whose humanity had been seen sees the humanity of the other. A transformation of sorts has taken place. And in the midst of all of that, the story says that his entire household rejoiced and they were all baptized. Conversion, by a way of being in the world. Indeed, how we act and how we live our faith is far more important often than the words that we say. People want to know that the faith that we live comes from a place of authenticity and is not simply words. All of us are aware of the hypocrisy that seems to surround us, of those who are simply latching on and taking it as a marketing opportunity to further their own goals or their own gains. In this story, the transformation is authentic. The jailer isn't doing this in order to gain something for himself, but simply as a real response to what occurs. It's easy for us in the midst of these times to experience a sense of compassion fatigue, of feeling overwhelmed, of wanting the summer simply to be those carefree days. And yet at the same time, the weight and the purposefulness of these days that we're in the midst of both a pandemic that isn't going away, despite assurances of those who say it will, and of those who see this shifting of our understanding of systemic racism as the time being now, propels us to not have the luxury of either despair or simply flipping off the channel. So let's look at the rest of the story. It says that the morning came, and the jailer receives word from the magistrate that Paul and Silas are to be let go, partly because they've now realized that Paul and Silas are Roman citizens, and what they've done is wrong, and that they will have consequences to bear. Paul and Silas say, "Oh no, we're not just going to sneak out so that you don't have to bear any consequences for what has happened. You want us to go? Then you come personally and you escort us from this place." In some ways, it's like the many videos that we've been seeing in these recent days and weeks of the kinds of abuse that those persons of color have been experiencing from all sorts of walks of society. Be it the old man who's pushed out the door and abused because he's Asian, or a First Nations person who's beat up, or a black person who is simply identified as a risk because of the color of their skin, and abused and beaten, or murdered. All of those images are being said to us as no longer images that will go away. It's not because they haven't existed before. It's because we haven't necessarily seen them or been willing to see them before. In this story, Paul and Silas say, you need to be called to account for the abuse and the behavior. We're not going to go quietly away, submissively away anymore. That's what we're hearing in the midst of this. And like many other critical moments in time, be it the civil rights movement, the Me Too movement, the environmental movement, the LGBTQ2 movement, there are these moments in which we come to these turning points, these potential transition points, and we have to decide. Will we simply give lip service to what it was? Or will we pivot and make a change? We keep talking about what the new normal will be. And typically we're referring to the pandemic when we talk about that. But I invite us to begin to see that in a larger way. The new normal will not allow us to go back to what was. Either our sense of the place of systemic racism in our own lives or society, in the way in which women are seen as objects or as persons, whether LGBTQ2 persons are seen as having the full range of rights and equalities, whether those who are persons of color will be seen as beautiful and as persons who contribute and whose voices are needed, all come together at this moment. In this story, Paul calls the authorities to account, and with his head held high, as he leaves the city, he moves to a place where he also can count on a sense of support and grounding again. They return to Lydia's house, the seller of purple cloth, the one who has power and privilege, but who's also fought hard to get it as a woman. And it is in that place that he regroups. We all are going to need time for that regrouping. But we need to do it together with those who are often on the margins or whose voices have not been heard. For us as Broadview United, as we move forward, we will have to continue to be very intentional about the voices that we invite to the table. And it will take a while for those diverse persons to feel like it's safe for their voices to be at the table. And we'll need to leave room for chairs to be empty and folks to be invited in, not in a tokenist way, but in a way that truly says your perspective and voice not only matters to us, but has the potential to change who we are. That's the challenge that the national church is working at claiming that it wants to be an intercultural church. It's a challenge that we will have as Broadview about being an intercultural church. It's a challenge we have been having to be a reconciling church, and it will continue to be the challenge we have at Broadview to work at developing and strengthening those relationships and not burdening those of those communities with the task of doing the work for us, but rather in inviting them together with us to move to something new. Will it be easy and simple? No. Will we have those moments in which we wish there was a clear map? But while the road is long and winding, and while we've been working to find our way this year and onward, we have made strides. And we have seen moments in which the diversity and the strength of what might be has come to be emerged. And so in this emerging time, may we, like the words of the song, "He ain't heavy, he's my brother," remind ourselves that it is out of that place of love and concern for the other that they don't become a burden, but rather an important part of that journey. May we see ourselves as working one with another toward this common goal of justice, peace, hope, love, and integration. Thanks be to God. Amen.
Strong enough to carry him. No burden is he to bear. We'll get there. For I know he would not encumber me. He ain't heavy. He's my brother. If I'm laden at all, I'm laden with sadness, and everyone's heart isn't filled with the gladness of love for one another. It's a long, long road from which there is no return. While we are on our way to there, why not share? And the load doesn't weigh me down at all. He ain't heavy. He's my brother. And the load doesn't weigh me down at all. He ain't heavy. You ain't heavy. He ain't heavy. He's my brother.
There are so many different ways to pray, and certainly communal prayer is one. Wherever you are today, I invite you to ground yourself, to check in with your own heart, to plant your feet on the ground, and simply be in the presence of love. Let us pray. The world is too much with us, O God. O God, some days the world is indeed too much with us. In these days of pandemic and isolation, when we yearn to reach out, arms to hug and hands to hold, how are we called to be? For we are a people of connection and relationship who long to walk beside each other through the joys and sorrows of life. The world can be too much with us, O God. These days of violence and poverty and overdoses that claim the most vulnerable. These days of racism cracked wide open. These days of seeing and believing and facing our privilege, perhaps for the first time or afresh in ways that startle us deeply. How do you call us to live? For we are a people deeply inspired by Jesus, the prophet and the agitator, the one who radically welcomed all people into his way of shalom. Some days, O God, the world can indeed be too much with us. And we who are part of your beloved creation can feel small and overwhelmed and dwarfed by emotions which numb and rattle us. So on this Sabbath day or this Sabbath moment, however and whatever shape in which you find us, may it be enough to pause and reflect and simply be enfolded by your goodness and your grace. May rest be the gift to refresh and renew our weary spirits. May love flow in us and through us and around us. May we have compassion for ourselves, and may we have compassion for others. May we have compassion for this fragile earth, and may all that is heavy in us become light as we commit ourselves in you to being your people in this time and space. O loving one, hear now our prayers for the people and situations in our lives and world that are most in need of hope and love and compassion. And so it is we name, either aloud or inside ourselves, those who are hurting and struggling and despairing for whatever reason. Those who are grieving and trying to make a fresh beginning in the midst of their deep hurt. We remember those who are dying and those who are being born. We would pray that the power brokers around the world would be brought to their knees, and that all who hunger and thirst for systemic justice might indeed live to create a new world order together and for all people. As the month of June draws to a close, we lift up and we celebrate the class of 2020. From those who are graduating kindergarten, to those who are moving through onto high school, those who are completing high school and convocating from colleges and universities. We remember the students, the teachers, the parents, the EAs, and all who have collaborated over many years to achieve the small steps and the huge milestones amidst tears, laughter, and dreams, all culminating in the next steps which await all of these folks. Oh God, on those days when the world is indeed too much with us, may you remind us that the ebb and flow of life will continue, come what may, but so too will your gifts of love, generosity, and kindness always be at our disposal. You gather us in community, even though we can't be together in the ways we are used to. And we know that you call us to have each other's backs and to walk the extra mile with each other and to share the joys that we have been gifted with and to always work on behalf of the hurting and the suffering. For your beautiful world and creation awaits us. May it be ever so. Amen.
And so as we end our time together and we go out into the world, may we do so with the words of the former moderator, Peter Short. I love his benediction. These are his words. Count your blessings. Practice your faith. Never look down on the struggle for life. Remember that behind every set of eyes is a soul at work. And know that wherever you go, the Spirit is already there. Thanks be to God. Amen.